Hello everyone, I'm Suru. I'm the AdMob monetization specialist for Greater China.
Hi everyone, my name is Jill. I'm covering Southeast Asia AdMob app business.
So we believe most of you guys have already participated our last quarter session on interstitial implementation, and today it's gonna be a more advanced level of interstitial based on the Firebase A/B testing and also some case studies. So why not we take a look of today's presenters? So today we're gonna have three people presenting. The first one is Walt. He's the mobile solution specialist for APAC, and Jill, which you guys already saw her just now. She's the mobile app specialist for Southeast Asia, and me, who's covering the Greater China mobile apps business. So let's take a look of the agenda today. We're gonna have 4 agenda today. The first one is the Firebase A/B testing on interstitial, which is done by Watt. The second one, we're gonna give you a quick recap on the policy principle for interstitial implementation. And also followed by that is like a success case studies of different verticals. And the last one, we're gonna give you a QA session based on the survey forms you guys submitted before the event. So if you have some upcoming questions during the event, you can also submit our questionnaire in the description link under the YouTube page. And also, if you wanna gain today's presentation materials, you can also submit a survey for us, which is also in the description part of the YouTube link. Okay, so why not we start? Let's invite Walt to give us the first topic on Firebase.
More than happy to. Thank you all for joining. My name is Walt, and I sit in our Tokyo office. My job is a product specialist, and my whole job is actually to help developers monetize, make money with their app. And the product I mainly cover is AdMob and Firebase. So before we get into how Firebase can help you implementing interstitial, I want just to take a few minutes to give you an really quick overview on what Firebase is and how Firebase can help you build and grow your app. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, next one. Next one. Thank you. So as many of you know, Firebase, its whole mission is to help you both build better mobile apps and grow your business. We know building an app is important, but grow and engage with your users is equally important. Firebase helps you from 3 ways. One is you can build apps fast without managing infrastructure. This is true for most of the cloud-based platforms. Firebase products like analytics, real-time database, messaging, crash reporting, these let you move very quickly and focus on your users without worrying about infrastructure at all. It's backed by Google. It's trusted by top partners, top app developers. So it's built on Google infrastructure. It scales automatically. So alongside from when you start a new business and you become a very large developer, Firebase can grow with you along the way without you even worrying about anything. The third point is it offers one console, but it has a lot of product offering that work really, really well together. Next one, please. Yeah, so it makes app success really, really focused and simple. So as I already mentioned, you don't need to worry about infrastructure. It automatically scales for you. Second, it's cross-platform. We want Firebase to work great on every platform. So we started by focusing on capabilities that works equally on iOS and Android. Many of the build backend services work on web today as well. So we're starting to expand the web offering as well. Also, mix and match is another thing I really, really want to highlight. So it's pretty easy to be tempted to use, choose a very unique platform, choose one web service because it has certain unique features. But one hidden cost people usually see is once you work with different platforms, different services, you start to realize they need to talk to each other. So integration is something Firebase have already built seamlessly together to enable powerful development experience. So while you can always pick what product you want to use, what product best fit your needs, there is the advantage that using multiple products across this Firebase platform makes your life really, really easy. So it's like just ordering in a restaurant. You can order whatever you want, but we also have recommended use of different products, which is exactly something we're going to go through today. And lastly is integrated products. As you know, Firebase is not a standalone product. It integrates pretty well with Google Cloud Platform and AdMob, as well as other features. Next slide, please. Just very quickly go through you what Firebase offers. It's largely divided into two segments. So it helps you, as I mentioned, it helps you to develop great apps, and equally it helps you to grow your user base, earn money, and analyze your data. And next slide, please. So really quickly, it has a bunch of new features, and it never stops growing. So I won't talk about each of them. Like obviously, we're going to focus on the growth side, and the key features, key products we're going to talk about is analytics and remote config. So let's look at them one by one. So analytics is the core part of Firebase because it collects all the behaviors, what's happening in the app, what your users are doing, who your users are. All these things are automatically collected by Firebase Analytics already largely. And you can for sure define your custom user properties, custom events. Basically, it's a place that it captures everything about what's going on with your user and within your app. So let's move to the next one. So when it is combined with remote config, it becomes very interesting because remote config is a powerful tool that has been very popular since the initial launch at 2016. It enables you to fine-tune your app behavior, to tell your app what should happen inside your app with conditions you predefine without asking your users to download a new version. So you change the in-app behavior on the server side using the Firebase console on the fly. So with Firebase config, you can run A/B test, A/B experiments, and measure the results in analytics, and then change your app experience or different, on the fly for different situations. For example, you can change the background color, you can change the layout, you can set pricing discount values for products. If you want to run a special promotion, you can use analytics, audience, or user properties. You can easily select different groups of users and see what happens to these specific segments of the users. So next slide, please. I want to go through you a little bit about Firebase remote config basics, how to use that just as a very basic oversimplification. So it's pretty simple. Actually, instead of using a local constant value, you just fetch a value from server side. It's just that easy. And then, of course, you need to define that server-side parameter on Firebase console. That's pretty straightforward. The interesting thing happens next. You can assign values to remote config parameters on Firebase console, and that value can be conditional on different situations. So that leads to the second block. It's pretty powerful. as I already mentioned, changes are made on the fly. Then one parameter can have different values for different users based on a number of things. So first, it can be based on random percentile. So if a user is within, let's say, 0 to 50%, or between 50 to 100%, you can assign like 2 different values to these 2 different groups. And once a user is assigned in one group, that assignment is persistent. So which makes the random percentile assignment is actually the core in Firebase remote config that enables A/B testing. But it's not just limited to randomized A/B testing. You can also assign different behaviors, different values of a server-side parameter based on app version, OS type, device language, user country, user properties. Let's say where the user is in the game. Let's say level 5, level 7, and for sure it can be different between different user audiences. For example, if you want to show ads to people who haven't purchased any in-app purchase items, and you don't want to show any ads to those who already have done so. So that's pretty easy with Firebase remote config. Then let's get to the meat part of this this chapter. So A/B testing with remote config. So the basic idea, as you see, is pretty easy. You have 100% traffic and you want to split them. It's either 50-50 or 5%, 95%, whatever works for you. The default group, we call it control group. It has whatever you already have in the app. And then the test group, or the challengers who see the new behavior or something you want to test out, we run them at the same time. So it's apple-to-apple comparison. So what are the common use cases? Let's go to the next slide. Awesome. So one, many partners, they don't want to put ads in their apps because they fear ads may impact user engagement, and they fear users may become unhappy and uninstall their ads. But however, you run a business and you want to make money and you want to support a team. And I mean, the whole point of making a great app is not just make user happy. It's also about building a successful business. But we want to make these changes smartly with data. So on Firebase console, if you create, let's say, a remote config parameter, say show ad, and you assign false to majority of the users who are already using your app, and you can assign true to a randomly picked 20% test group. And then you can measure, as you go, you can measure the KPIs, namely user engagement, average session duration, uninstalls. You can see what's the difference between group A and group B. And typically we see if things are implemented properly, the difference should be very, very insignificant. Once you see that, you can ramp up group B more. Then gradually, all of the traffic can have ads monetizing your app. And then let's go to the second use case. So the next one is what really I want to introduce you today. Test interstitial frequency correlation with UX. So I've met just a lot of partners who really care about their users, which I believe all of developers are, who are conservative and really fear if I ramp up my interstitial frequency, like what will happen to the user experience. So the workflow is exactly the same. To do this, we actually set up 2 ad units on AdMob frontend with different frequency caps. I'll have a few screenshots later so you can see how exactly you can do that. And then on Firebase console, you create a server-side parameter that refers to the control test ad units. And again, just to be double clear, these 2 ad units have 2 different frequency cap set. So ad unit A, in this example, I'm saying 2 ads per hour. And for ad unit B, I'm saying 3 ads per hour. And then once you make this change, you push it live, and then you can start measuring KPIs between group A and group B. See how ad frequency impacts user experiment. So I will give you a detailed view on how you exactly do that, so you can just have a better idea what is kind of the work you're going to do. But just before that, I just want to extend the view a little bit, because it's not really limited to interstitial. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so there are really a wide range of use cases you can use Firebase as a totally free tool for you. So one, as I already mentioned, as using interstitial as an example, you want to carefully roll out a new ad implementation. You want to measure what did videos impact on your IP revenue. If you want to introduce a new ad placement, would the user be unhappy? Is it a good or bad idea? You want to test that out. And for sure, ad frequency. And then you already have ad placement up and running, you still may want to optimize implementation with A/B testing. So again, find a sweet spot between ad frequency and user experience is something we're going to go through in the next few minutes. Also, you can try out different ad implementation options. So this can be like different native ad implementation, native design. It can be different rewarded video prompt. It can be different timing of interstitial pop-ups. Whatever you think you assume would work better for your app and your users. Maybe test different mediation platforms for sure. And lastly, a very popular use case is tailoring ad experience to different users. Show ads to paying users, show no ads to paying users, high lifetime value users, show more ads to users who, for example, have rejected discounted offers for, let's say, three times. All these kind of things, it fits the same workflow with remote config and can be done very easily. And I want to show you in the next slide that actually, no matter you're a big developer or small developer, Firebase remote config analytics works equally great. So on the left-hand side, you see Konami. They have been using Firebase remote config and analytics to fine-tune their rewarded ads design and frequency. So after a few rounds of experiment, they successfully increased their ad revenue by almost 18%. And on the right-hand side, you see Gadgets, which is also a developer based in Japan. They're like also pretty big, relatively, but not as big as Konami. But they did the same thing in a very short time window. They just played around with different ad frequencies with interstitial and rewarded. So as you know, interstitials, you always want to be careful, but rewarded, you expect rewarded video to increase your user engagement in your app. And the interesting finding from Gadget's case study was they actually found that interstitial, even though they doubled the interstitial frequency, the user experience, user engagement didn't change at all. And on the other hand, they doubled rewarded video frequency by twice as well. So what interesting thing happened is they doubled all their ads frequency, and they increased both average session time and advertising revenue. So that's actually what I really want to share with you, and can be done. I want you to get the feeling that it can be done like rather easily. So in next few slides, I'm going to show you exactly how they're done on Firebase and AdMob UIs. So let's jump to the next slide. So step one, as I mentioned, we need to add units for control group and test group on AdMob frontend with different frequency caps. So the screenshot, as you see, is where you create a new ad unit. And for sure, it's the same when you edit an existing ad unit. You can set a frequency cap by clicking the radio button in the red box. show no more than X impressions per user per Y minutes or hours. For sure, you can. This is actually the recommended way because everything is controlled on the server side. You don't need to worry about anything. But if you do have your own implementation controlling when and how frequently you show interstitial ads, it's the same idea. It's just not two different ad units. It's just two probably different values. Let's say you want one ad every, let's say, 65 seconds or 165 seconds. Like it's pretty flexible. But if you do want to go the vanilla way, use two ad units, then we just create two. And then what next we will do is we go to the Firebase console, which is shown on the next slide. You click on the remote config sidebar menu. And if you don't have any existing remote config parameter, you just click on add your first parameter, and then you just, can we go to the next slide? You just give your parameter a good name. Here we say task completion ad unit ID. And then you supply a default value for your ad unit. So remember, we have two ad units for control group and the test group. So here we put the ad unit ID of the default for the control group. And then next, we add and value for we add value for condition. And in order to that, we actually need to define a new condition. So that's pretty just a breeze. If we go to the next slide, you define a condition you say, I want to have a value that is conditional on the following. So the condition is user in random percentile, which is below or equal to 5%. So in this example, I'm just creating a condition that separates 5% of my overall traffic and give them a different value. And if we move to the next one, now we have created a test group. And I forgot to mention that you have to name this test group. Here we named it experiment 1, variant 1. It's just a naming convention. You can just name it like what experiment, what is the variant name, like more ads, fewer ads, 3 ads per hour, like whatever name that works for you and ensures you don't forget what that means. And you can also attach like a year and month so that you know that variant that experiment was conducted in that date range. So we give it a name, and then as you can see, in addition to the default value, we're now assigning a different ad unit ID to the test group. So users in the experiment 1, variant 1 group will now see the experimental ad unit. And the rest of the users will see the default ad unit. And before you push this live, you need a little bit change in your code. It's really easy, as I will show you in the next slide. It's just a few lines. You just get instead of using a static ad unit ID, you just fetch it from server side through our Firebase remote config API, get string. Since we named this parameter task completion ad unit ID, we just use that name. And then we're good to go. The only piece we need to be double sure is we need to tag the user which group they are in. So eventually Firebase Analytics can separate them with a user property. So in the red dashed line box, you can see there is an additional line that you tag the user, oh, this user is using this ad unit. So later on, you can filter them with this ad unit ID and see how their user engagement metrics change. That's largely it. And the only thing you need to do is push it live and push the server-side parameters live. It take effect immediately after you click the publish button. There are some tips I want to share with you before you actually start to do that. So there are some tips. As you know, we offer pretty much flexibility in customizing, events, user properties, but they are not unlimited. So the number of custom user properties is maximum 25. So what I would recommend is you create one user property for the experiment for all A/B testing, and you run one experiment at a time. Running one experiment at a time, always a best practice because you don't want any other factors to influence, your user experience. So like you're mixing things in one experiment, then it's hard for you to be, very scientifically tell like these certain differences can be attributed to certain changes. So it's always good to run one experiment at a time, and it's good for us to reuse the same user property for different A/B tests, so we don't hit the maximum 25 user property limit. And then last piece is remember to turn on developer mode for remote config. So remote config when it is in production environment, it has caching behavior. So that you don't need to contact to the server all the time, and making the communications overhead minimal and even not noticeable. So when you develop your app and you test, you don't want that behavior. You don't want caching. You just want to see whatever you change on the server side immediately reflects in the client side. So turning on remote config developer mode will allow you to do that easily. And if you still want a step-by-step full instruction on how you can exactly do this kind of A/B testing, we actually have a code lab which is hosted on codelabs.developers.google.com. You can take a second to take a note on this short link, or you can just go to codelabs.developers.google.com and go to the Firebase category and find the monetization from good to great code lab, and that's exactly the same code lab I linked here. Once everything is live, then the only thing we need to do is to monitor the KPIs, see whether the user installs, average session duration, your IP revenue have any difference between two groups. And typically, what we've seen so far is if ads are implemented properly, users are pretty tolerant with moderate level of ad frequency. That's actually good for both users because they can continue use your app for free, and it's great for you because you can earn more money from your user base without making your user unhappy. Before I hand over to Jill, I just want to mention something extra very quickly. So AdMob plus Google Analytics for Firebase. As I mentioned, Firebase, the beauty of Firebase is not that it offers tons of features, but the integrations between these different features. So AdMob Analytics, as products under the Firebase brand, they just got an integration this May. Can we go to the next slide? Which is a fancy animation. You can see they come together. And what it really does is it bring in all the ad-related events and metrics into Firebase. So you cannot really find a analytics platform does that for you because it tells you how many impressions you've delivered, how many clicks happened, and you can slice and dice these data for different user segmentations, and you can look at them per screen. And we also offer some very important and interesting metrics like ad exposure. We'll show you actually in the next few slides. So just some really quick screenshots. So since we have all the ad revenue in analytics, the lifetime value and ARPU on Firebase Analytics will not only include IAP, but also include ad revenue as well. And as you can see in the red boxes, these numbers include ad revenue. And then if we go to the next screenshot, in events tab, you can see two new events, which is ad click and ad impression. And these are automatically imported from your app without writing a single line of code. It's all automated, as well as like many default automatically collected events from Firebase. It just requires zero code and for sure zero cost from you. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see, as I mentioned, other than these common metrics we see like clicks, impressions, estimated revenue, eCPMs, you can also see ad exposure. When you see 92%, 9%, the banner ad unit actually shows up on the specific screen or within your whole app 92% of the time, 93% of the time. So that's very interesting because eventually you want to earn more money through less ads. And when you implement interstitial rewarded video, you have a good idea like how much time users spent engaging with ads versus engaging with the content. And lastly, which is pretty obvious, but I just want to mention it explicitly. You can, all these numbers, metrics we surface with this integration, you can segment by audience, by user property, any way you want to slice and dice your data, you can do that easily. So just to recap, like all these things you can play with. Either it's remote config or it's Firebase analytics, or it's the integration between analytics and AdMob. It all comes for free with very minimal coding, and it gives you a very good view of the your holistic revenue distribution. If you're already on the AdMob, new AdMob UI or the AdMob beta, you will notice that once you link your AdMob app and your Firebase project, you start to see the whole picture of your revenue, including IP, e-commerce, and subscription is actually coming very soon. As many of you already noticed that Google Play launched subscription support a while ago. And then we have ads revenue, including AdMob revenue and third-party network revenue mediated by AdMob mediation. So you have everything in one place, and you have all the tools for you to fine-tune your interstitial implementation, interstitial frequency, and eventually you can earn more money. And that's all I have. Before we move to policy topics, any questions, things unclear?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. I'll just.
If you have any questions for what, just submit the survey, the question form attached in the description of the YouTube link. We received some of the questions here already.
Okay, cool. I'll take a look. how about we just move on to the next piece and we can address all the questions after the session?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
That's good.
Okay. So, thank you, Walt, for giving us like a very detailed instruction on how to use Firebase to do A/B testing on interstitial. I hope this can solve a lot of questions that you guys raised about how to keep the balance of monetization and keep the good user retention or the UX experience. So here today, I'm gonna give you a quick recap on the policy principle of interstitial implementation. To start with, I hope you guys still remember the interstitial golden rule that we talked about last quarter. Here we're gonna give a review again, which is the page before and after interstitial should be two different pages within the app. There are 2 points to mention here. The first one is different, meaning like before and after interstitial, the two screens should be different contents. And the second word is within. Within means before and after interstitial, the screens should be within the app environment instead of outside that. For example, like the desktop, this is not allowed. So we will walk you through some detailed examples, which you might have seen last time, to review on this practice of the rule. So the first common scenario that we come to like a policy violation on interstitial is when the app loads or when the person exits the app. The first case is when the person clicks on the app and the app loads. Like the person clicks on the icon on the desktop, we see the interstitial app pop out. After close it, there is a loading page, and after that, it's the home screen of the app. This is not allowed because before interstitial, it is the desktop, which is outside of the app environment. Thus, it violates the golden rule that we just discussed. And this is the second scenario where people exit the app by clicking the exit, and then interstitial pop up. After close it, we see the desktop. This is not allowed because after interstitial, this is the desktop screen instead of the app environment. So this also violates the golden rule. So how can we implement this correctly if we want to put interstitial at the app loads or the exit part? Let's see a quick example. So this one is to place interstitial after the loading page or the logo page. So after the person clicks on the icon, we first show a loading page or a logo page of your logo, and then interstitial pops up. After close it, we see the home screen of the app. This is totally fine because before and after interstitial, it's two different pages within the app. So this also applies to the case where people exit the app. Like we can let the user click exit first, then we show an interstitial ad. After we close the interstitial ad, we can see another confirmation page. And then after that confirmation page, the person exits to the desktop. So this will not violate the golden rule and it's allowed. The second common scenario is called the unexpected launch, mainly meaning a way that prevents the users from viewing the app's core content and launch interstitial unexpectedly. Let's see an example to know the details. So the first case happens when the user launches the app. After the user clicks at the icon and the app already launches and the person goes to the home screen, all of a sudden the interstitial ad just pop up. After the user closes it, we go back to the home screen. This is not allowed because before and after interstitial, it is two same screens, thus violating the golden rule. The second example is after the page loads. After the person clicks on like a action button, and then they go to the next page. The next page already loaded, and all of a sudden interstitial just pop up. After close it, we go back to the next page. This is not allowed with the golden rule, as you guys might already know. So what's the correct implementation in this kind of cases? So we can only put interstitial at the transition part while the user switch the screen. So before and after interstitial, you should put two different screens, as you can see from this picture. Sometimes you might say like, I don't deliberately do that. Like there's this kind of violation because there's some latency of interstitial ads showing. If it's this kind of cases, we recommend you to go to the developer page and search preloading. If you use preloading, ads will be loaded in advance and it will be shown at the place that you want it to be shown. So this will avoid violating the regulations. The third scenario is called recurring interstitials, meaning interstitial repeatedly appear even after the user clicks close. As you can see in this page, the user already choose an action and suddenly it triggers the interstitial. After he closes it, another interstitial is triggered. And then after close that, he finally goes to the next page. This is not allowed because between these two interstitials, you can see it's not two different screens within the app. It is the ad itself. So this is violating the regulation. The last scenario is called impacting navigation. This is not necessarily talking about the golden rule, but want to remind you of the frequency when you implement interstitial, because sometimes it's not that as many interstitial as possible, but just put it at the right place with the right frequency. So as you can see, although this does not violate the golden rule, it is too frequent. Whenever the user transits from one screen to the other, it will trigger interstitial. If the user continuously sees interstitial ads for 3 times, 4 times, they will get quite bored, and this will result to a loss of the user. So when you implement interstitial ads, apart from obeying the golden rule, also bear the user experience in mind and try not to make it too often. So let's end it with the golden rule again. The page before and after interstitial should be 2 different pages within the app. We hope after this session, which is the second time you guys hear about this rule, we will see fewer violations in the future about interstitial, and we hope you guys have provide better user experience for the users and gain more revenue from interstitial. Okay, so that's pretty much about the principle recap. And we'll welcome Jill to give us introduction about some case studies on interstitial verticals.
So hello everyone, my name is Jill. So for my session, I'll be talking mainly about some success case studies. So before we start, I think we'll be starting with some general tips across different verticals. So in the apps world, we know that the main verticals can be separated into 2 segments. The first one would be definitely the gaming, which representing maybe over 70% of the revenue in the apps world. The second segmentation would be tools and utility, also non-gaming apps. So how can we implement interstitial properly into these 2 different verticals, into these 2 different audience? So there's one on the gaming, some of the common implementations of the interstitial we've seen so far, and also with great success without interrupting the user experience, would be from below placements. The first one would be app loading, and some other common ones would be, for example, when the user has finished a level, or when the users have level up or failed on particular levels. Some other common scenarios, for example, when the users are in the page or home page, or when the users are about to exit the games. But on top of this general tips for the gaming apps, you also need to remember about the golden rules that Sue has mentioned before, which is that in all these interstitial placements, there have to be 2 different pages before and after the interstitial placement. And another very, very important golden rule to keep in mind on the gaming users is that remember your targets with the gaming audience is that you need to think about how to remain a very high percentage of the engagement and how to remain a very high percentage of the retention rate. So when you keep this in mind, you definitely will understand that when it comes to the gaming apps for the interstitial placement, it has to be after the user has complete and certain action, or after the users have played your apps for quite a long time. So that would be the golden tips for the gaming apps. When it comes to tools and utilities, so basically the principle would be pretty similar. So the key principle is definitely, again, it has to be in completion of users' task with your app. And also it has to be provide a great user experience for the users when they're using your apps. So for the tools and utilities, some of the common implementation we've seen so far, again, when it comes to when user has finished a certain task, where user has finished the shared function within the tools and utility apps. And another very common implementation would be the trigger apps. So the final tips on the interstitial implementation would be, first of all, remember and think about the frequency cap, or try to find the best frequency to balance the user experience and the interstitial revenue. So this one is echo back to the first presentation that Walt has given about using the Firebase remote config feature to do the A/B testing on finding the right frequency of your app for the interstitial ads. And the second tips would be differentiate the users. So again, if we think about what Walt has presented, it's very important to feed the right interstitial ads to the right segment of the users at the right timing. So all of this, again, can also be done with Firebase. So highly encourage you guys to explore the Firebase and also the Firebase remote config Firebase A/B testing feature later after the session. So next part, before we really deep dive into the 3 success case studies, I just want to briefly highlight about one common ask from the publisher. So the question would be, whenever I implement interstitial, I often see a decrease in the app rating, app review on the Google Play platform. So how can I prevent this to happen? How can I prevent the interstitial to interfere the user experience? So the answer to this question actually is very simple. And this is actually another reason why we start today's session with Firebase, which is that it's extremely important for the publisher or for the developers to look back into your own users' data and do the dynamic adjustments on the ad frequency. What does this mean? So if we are looking at the data, you see there are basically 3 color of lines. The first one would be the green color. So this one representing the ratings of your app on the App Store. And the second line you can notice would be the impression from the interstitial. So in this example, it shows that so when the developer has noticed their app's rating coming down from 4.38 down to 4.16, they actually did a very dynamic adjustment on their interstitial frequency, which can be representing from the yellow line. So immediately they actually adjusted their interstitial frequency to a lower level, which resulting in the uplift back of their higher user ratings, user reviews of their app. And once their rating has gone back and even higher than the level before, the developers again adjusting on the frequency, the impression of the interstitial in results, bringing up the revenue, which will be represented by the blue line, to an even higher level than before. So what does this mean? This means that for all the ads and ads placement, especially on interstitial, when it comes to the sweet spot between user experience and interstitial revenue, it's very important to keep in mind that it's a dynamic adjustment process. You have to go back into your own user data frequently. Okay, so after the principles we've mentioned, below I'll be sharing about 3 recent success stories from our publishers. So the publishers basically they're based in Korea, Sri Lanka, and lastly the last example will be coming from China. So the first success story we have would be our publisher named called OGQ, coming from Korea. And the apps they have is called Backgrounds. So Backgrounds is a tools and utility apps. They provide a very high quality background images to the users. And the challenge that OGQ is facing is that the majority of their users are actually coming from the emerging markets. So emerging markets here, for example, they have users from Russia and India, where it's actually quite challenging in terms of the eCPM. But after they implement the interstitials, what they have found is that not only the eCPM has increased to 3 times, but also they see that there's no loss in terms of the user engagement, and they also see a very good attraction on the click-through rates, which is double than before. So in this case, it's highlighted that when it comes to the different markets audience, for example, for the developed markets versus the emerging markets, it's very important that how to leverage the high eCPM of interstitial to better monetize with a developing markets audience. This would be the exactly placement from OGQ. So how does it work? This is a background app. So once the user has downloaded the image for more than 5 times, and then the user will see a pop-up message saying that the image has been saved. After every 5 image download, then the user will see an interstitial pop up. So you might be asking, like, why is every 5 image? So again, this is actually the testing results of their own analytics tool that they're testing out on the different frequency. For example, would it be the best if I pop out the interstitial every 3 minutes, or would it be better if I pop out interstitial every 10 images? And after the trials and error, they actually found out that after every 5 image, it can bring them the maximize of the user retention rate metrics and also the interstitial revenue. So the next example we have, it's coming from 4Access. So 4Access is actually one of our partner based in Sri Lanka. 4Access is mainly developing the sketching app, which have over 10 million downloads globally. So 4Access, what they love about interstitial is that they use the trigger ads formats. For those you might not have been heard of trigger ads, so basically trigger ads is a formats that they allow the users to choose whether they want to view an ad or not. And after the user has given consent to view the ads, then the ads will show up. So on this trigger ads implementation of the interstitial, what we have with us is almost 6%, almost 6 times increase in terms of the click-through rates. And we also seeing a very high eCPM, which has increased nearly 19 times. When we look at the actual implementation, so the first image will be the main interface from the app. And here, as you can see, this will be one of the example of the trigger ads icon. One tip is that remember when you do the implementation of the trigger ads, remember to put the ads attribution on the icon. So in this particular case, after each time the user has clicked on the trigger ads icon, then the interstitial ads will show to the users. So in this placement, you can see that basically the users are happy. Basically, this kind of placement can have a higher click-through rates because the user has already known beforehand that this is actually an ads. Okay. And the last case we have is coming from our partner who is based in China. So for this partner, their company name is called Parallel Space. So the app is actually a very interesting app. So the app actually enables the Android phone users to clone and run multiple accounts on the utility on their same app simultaneously. It also has reached over 50 millions of downloads on the Google Play. So for this partner, again, what we've seen that is that many of their audience are based in emerging markets, especially in India. And within India, we've witnessed a very high eCPM. So here you can see that after they implemented interstitial, they have witnessed an increase of eCPM for around 4 times. And also they don't see any loss in terms of the user engagements, with almost increased by 1.5 times of the click-through rates. So what is the placement like? So in the first image, you can see that after the users has opened the clone app by tapping on the app icon, and every time when the clone app was open in the parallel space in the app itself, then the interstitial will shown after the starting page of the app. So again, if you think about all the placements of all the case studies we've just shared now, one of the common threads of the case studies is that they carefully think about where they should put the interstitial placements. And they all choose to put the placements after the users have completed a certain action. The second tip to remember is that in terms of either the frequency cap or like how many actions, after how many actions that user have completed, that they should put the interstitial. They also carefully by choosing the right frequency by doing the A/B testing or by using the analytics tool. So that would be all the golden rules when it comes to the best interstitial placements. Of course, you also need to think about the policy golden rules as Sue just presented before. It's also very, very important. Okay, so here comes to our last session of today. That will be the Q&A session. And let's look at some of the live questions now.
I guess I can start with a few really good questions. Thank you all for submitting these questions. So, what is the best frequency capping for casual games? I think that actually the right answer is there is no answer because each game differs very largely, and there is no one size fits all. I cannot say like 5 ads per hour is best because it really differs. That's why this A/B testing tool for you comes really important because you need to find the best sweet spot for your own. Next question it is about China. So my app integrated with Firebase SDK. Would China users access Firebase database? So to be very honest, today's session is more about the grow part of Firebase. And as you know, Firebase is a huge group of products. What I can share is Firebase Analytics or Google Analytics for Firebase is fully tested, supported, and certified in China. So if you notice, you shouldn't be noticing any inaccurate numbers within China versus outside of China. On the rest of the features, we've been working with partners. There are some known issues that can go into pretty details, but I haven't heard like a feature just completely doesn't work. So if you notice any limitation in Firebase, other products, I would encourage you to send the feedbacks through the Firebase support forum. And thank you very much in advance for any feedbacks you supply on that. But again, Analytics is fully supported and certified. And then the next question about Firebase thing is across what metrics is the A/B testing report generated? Which case serves better user experience for interstitial ads? So by default, if you go to the Firebase console, you can see there are a number of metrics already surfaced in the analytics console. And the most important thing we look at when we want to measure the correlation between ad frequency and user engagement is the user engagement metrics, which are largely three components. One is daily engagement, engagement per user, and then sessions per user. So overall, what we really care is our users as engaged as users who see less ads. And if we see the engagement per user or the average duration of user sessions or the aggregated session duration, if they are similar, very close to the default group, then it's pretty safe for us to draw the conclusion that it doesn't really change user behavior. But of course, there are other metrics you can define. For example, like if you're a puzzle game, how many rounds of the game a user play. These can be implemented through custom event in Firebase. Next question. Let me take a look. So about code implementation, do we need to pass some user property as well with AdUnit to Firebase for later use in A/B testing? That's a very good question. Actually, we need that. I just highlighted very quickly in my slides. You need one line to tell Firebase Analytics that this user is in control group or in test group. So in my example, we just simply used the AdUnit ID as a tag. So later on, when you go to Firebase console under analytics, you can filter with different audience IDs and see how the user engagement metrics I just mentioned changes between these two groups. And probably the last one, how many maximum users we put in A/B testing? So if I understand the question correctly, it's about like what is the sample size of the user basis we want to A/B test? To be very pragmatic, I would recommend. I mean, if the user sample, the test group is too small, then there might be a lot of noises. If one of the users just play the game heavily or purchase a lot of in-app purchasing items, then it will just ruin the A/B testing result. So basically, we want at least tens of thousands of impressions. I think it's the very, very minimum. The more, the better, because the more the sample size, the bigger the sample size is, the less noise you have. And with smaller sample size, you start to question the A/B test result, whether it's statistically significant, whether the difference is just by luck, by pure chance, or is something real. So I would say for many partners, we just recommend like 50-50 tests if the risk is not too high. If you're really rolling out something gradually, from 5% to 10%, then ramp up to 20%, 30%, 50% gradually, I think is the best practices. And I mean, being conservative is great, but at the same time, the learnings and information from A/B testing, it definitely has huge amount of value, as you can see in the cases I just shared. So I'd encourage investing a little bit more user traffic in A/B testing so that we can be sure that the data and insights is valid and useful. I think that's all for Firebase A/B testing, interstitial ad frequency. Back to you, Lucy and Joe.
Yeah. So thanks everyone again for submitting the live questions. We got a lot of great questions. So for example, a lot of publishers have been asking about how to implement the trigger ads and what are the common policy rules about trigger ads. So here I'll be sharing some of the general information and also the tips on the trigger ads implementation when it comes to policy. So first is that remember the trigger display on the screen must be in the proper way. So it means that it cannot overlap or cannot incentivize the users to click on the trigger ads design. The second principle of the trigger ads is that the trigger is counted as an ads, and advertising or any other paid promotional material added to monetize on that page should not exist your core ad content. So this policy actually is aligned with all the other ads placements, including interstitial. The third one would be that the size of the trigger ads should not be larger than the major app elements. So this one is also quite intuitive. Again, it's the same as what we have for the interstitial. And another tip is on the ad attribution. So remember I mentioned about the trigger ads icon needs to have ad attribution on top of it. Remember that the ad attribution must be clear. So for example, below are two acceptable and considered attributions. Either you put ad or you put advertisements. So this two can also be localized, means that it can be your own language. Okay, so let's look at some other common questions. Yeah, another great questions from the developer is that so developer is asking the average time for my users to finish a level in the game is 2 to 3 minutes. Is it advisable to put an interstitial ad after the user completes a level? So my answer to this question is that generically I would say yes. So it's definitely much better to put the interstitial after the users have complete a level. But the other thing I want to highlight that you also need to look back into the data about the average time versus the mass audience, the most of the users who are playing your games, like will be mostly within how many minutes. What does this mean? So for example, maybe when you look into the number, right, maybe actually about 90% of the users actually playing your app, maybe less than 1 minute. But the average time is only a result of the heavy players. So which will pull up your average time into 2 to 3 minutes. So if this is the case, I would suggest that you customize the interstitial to these two different segments of the users. So as Walt has presented in the first agenda, that I highly recommend that you use the either Firebase or any other analytics tool available to find the right interstitial frequency sent to different segments of the users. Okay. So another question we have would be
Yeah, so here we also have two questions about the policy. The first one is trigger ad icon is on main menu on my gaming app. If I put interstitial ad on triggered ad icon, the before and after screen will be the same. What can I do to avoid violation? Okay, so as Joe mentioned, trigger ad actually is a special format of interstitial. This is not completely applied to the golden rule. As long as you obey the trigger ad rule, it is okay. Like meaning you create the ad attribution and the trigger elements, everything, and after that it will trigger a confirmation page as well. And then once the user clicks yes to watch the ad, you will show the interstitial ad. So as long as this is obeyed, it is okay with trigger ad. The other question is I have app which shows text stories. Users can go on forward and previous stories on same activity. Let's say I have 100 stories. Is it okay to show interstitial ads after every 10 stories? So this developer is asking about the frequency of interstitial showing. It is quite common to see ads showing during like in the novel apps. If the novel is quite long and the ads can be shown like every few minutes or pages. But we cannot say exactly like this frequency is the best. So getting back to what has mentioned, we recommend you guys to do the testing about the frequency of interstitial based on Firebase. This will give you a better understanding about the user behavior instead of we just averagely break them into 10 interstitial implementation. Yeah. So
yeah, so that's it for today's session. Thank you guys for joining again. And we appreciate if you guys can help us to fill up the survey question to help us to improve for the future sessions in terms of the contents or any other requests. Thank you guys again, and hopefully can see you guys next time.
thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.